In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors from around the NHL. And today we have updates on the Ottawa Senators. Could they continue to dip into free agency? We're looking at a potential trade between the Bruins as well as the Oilers. We have some updates on an Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade. The Maple Leafs were really close to acquiring a different defenseman, and he could still be on the move. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about here today. Some free agent and trade rumors from around the NHL. I want to kick things off with the Ottawa Senators possibly dipping into free agency here yet again. I mean, there's no guarantee this is going to happen, but according to TSN's Frank Saravalli, there is mutual interest between the Ottawa Senators and longtime NHL forward and current UFA Cory Perry. Now, of course, we've known Cory Perry signed a one-year deal with the Dallas Stars last year after being bought out by the Anaheim Ducks. Didn't have an absolutely great regular season. It was really okay at best, but he certainly redeemed himself and had a really strong run here in the 2020 return to play during the Stanley Cup playoffs, with the Dallas Stars going all the way to the Stanley Cup finals and unfortunately losing to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So his quest for another Stanley Cup came just a little bit short, but he was a force. He scored some big goals and was back to his old self, where he was that agitating type of power forward. So certainly a player that a lot of teams you would think have interest in. And I think the only reason Perry right now is unsigned is he's kind of taking his time, weighing his options. Not really sure where he wants to end up. I think there is some interest in Dallas, but of course they still have to complete signing their restricted free agents. Last one left is Rupe Hintz, and I think they're going to be pretty close to the cap, and they just might not be able to swing fitting Perry back into this lineup. I mean, it is remotely possible depending on what he'll agree to for a contract, so I wouldn't completely rule that out. But in the interim, Ottawa is one of the teams that have emerged to have interest. Now, of course, since this interest has started, the Senators have made a few other moves. Like they picked up Austin Watson via trade from Nashville. They also signed Alex Galchenyuk, which came out yesterday. So clearly, the Sens have a good amount of veterans that they've brought into this lineup now to play with their younger, somewhat experienced players, as well as the newer prospects that are going to be jumping in to a full-time role for the first time this year. So as much as I might be open to the idea of Cory Perry joining the team, he'd be a great leader, tons of experience, Stanley Cup pedigree. Can you imagine a line with guys like Watson, Tkachuk, and Perry out there running around driving people crazy? The Senators team would be really, really hard to play against and drive other teams nuts, which would be fun, especially from a Senators perspective. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to see one of their other great prospects get boxed out of a spot here that could also potentially happen because of other players they've brought in, like Galchenyuk and Watson. I mean, you can't have all rookies. You need some experience in that lineup, and obviously they don't have a ton of it. I mean, they still have guys like Artemi Nisimov, they have Connor Brown, they have Chris Tierney to mix in here. Brady Tkachuk will be going on year 3, so he's already emerging as a leader on this team. So as much as it's an intriguing idea, and I wouldn't be completely against it, if Perry came in, I'd want to see another veteran leave, to be honest, like an Anisimov or somebody else, to make sure that they have guys like Logan Brown, Drake Batherson, Tim Stützle if he's ready, Alex Formenton. These guys need to play this year. They need to have a breakthrough season. If these prospects are going to have a shot of really coming through and helping this team really contend here down the road, they need to get their feet wet and get more experience now. So we'll see what happens. No guarantees Perry goes to Ottawa, but there apparently is mutual interest in something that we just might see here in the next little while. Now, when it comes to Oliver Ekman-Larsson, you have to wonder, will a trade still happen, even though that imposed deadline that he and his agent gave the Coyotes has come and gone? Is there any possibility at this point? It's difficult to say, and one would probably say most likely not. According to comments from Ekman-Larsson himself, he indicated that he never really wanted to be traded, that essentially he was trying to help the team because he believed, based on what he was told, that the team wanted to move him. They wanted to move his contract, save some money, and essentially he was trying to cooperate because he's just trying to be a nice guy and help them out. That's why he would not give them very many destinations that he'd be willing to waive his no-trade clause for, because he felt like he had that right to be picky, and obviously he loves it in Arizona, he said, from a family perspective, likes playing there. He wouldn't have signed long-term if he didn't, and clearly that's where he wants to be. So if they wanted to move him, there's only a couple scenarios that he would be agreeable to make that happen. Now, of course, like we know, the deadline that he and his agent gave the Coyotes came and went. Looks like the Bruins and the Canucks were the only teams that he'd be waiving for. Boston didn't really want to make the deal. They weren't nearly as interested as Vancouver was. Vancouver was trying hard, but just could not put a package together that the Coyotes would agree to. So based on these comments, you would think that there's a pretty good chance he ends up staying. But the question is, for how long? If they really wanted to move him here as recently as the last few weeks, you'd have to think that their desire to want to move him likely hasn't really changed, and it very well could come up again. I'm not saying it's going to, but I think that they were motivated from a couple of different perspectives. One, I think they're motivated from a money perspective because we know the Coyotes have had a lot of issues, and especially on the financial side. So to move a big-time contract that still has a lot of term and a lot of money on it, understandable from that perspective. The other thing is there's been some rumblings around that the leadership of Oliver Ekman-Larsson has come into question with head coach Rick Tocchet, that maybe he would prefer a different kind of leader in that team and wouldn't mind shaking things up. And that could be another part of why things were going the way that they were. Now, so could that still change in the future? Could he stay and play out his whole contract? I guess it's possible. But in my own opinion, not a rumor from insiders, I would suggest that it is something that still could be revisited, but it's probably going to be a little while before we see that happen. At this point, more than likely, not going to happen anytime in the very near future. But I would think, depending on how things go from a financial perspective in Arizona, this is something that very well could come up again. And we'll see if the Canucks or others can put something together. Because at this point, it's not going to be easy for teams to do with a flat cap, likely not going away for at least a couple more years. Now, as we know, the Toronto Maple Leafs blue line looks a lot different now than it did before. But before they made the moves they did, bringing in guys like TJ Brodie as well as Zach Bogosian, they were in some heavy trade talks with the Florida Panthers around Mackenzie Weegar. Now, James Myrtle of The Athletic has confirmed here recently that the Leafs were really, really close to making the acquisition. I know there's a lot of Leafs fans, at least the ones that I've seen through online social media, indicating that they were really open to a Mackenzie Weegar trade coming into the Leafs to provide that back end with some much more needed grit and toughness. And they were, something that they were hoping to see happen. Unfortunately, it never did. Now, of course, with the players they brought in, I still think the Maple Leafs blue line overall will be better this coming year. And it should be tougher to play against as well. And at the same time, have some guys who could kind of help move the puck. So I think they'll be in pretty good shape the way they are. But obviously that trade came close. But I guess the main thing that was caused it to not happen is the Panthers wanted just more than the Maple Leafs were willing to give up. Now, I don't know exactly what was on the table going back to the Florida Panthers. I would assume they'd probably want a defenseman back, maybe somebody who could become a little bit cheaper. As we know, Weegar is a pending restricted free agent, still remains unsigned. We've heard comments from he and his agent indicating that they're very disappointed that there's no contract so far, and based on the offers that have come in from the Florida Panthers, they're just not happy, and at this point it likely will go through arbitration. There's a pretty good chance, or he could end up being traded somewhere else, and regardless if he goes through arbitration or not, I still think that Mackenzie Weegar's time in Florida is likely coming to an end sooner rather than later. Now, there's certainly other teams out there that we know are looking for blue line help. You'd have to throw in a team like the Boston Bruins, for example, the Winnipeg Jets, maybe New Jersey. There's plenty of teams out there looking for help on the blue line that may be willing more so than the Panthers to pay the desired asking price here for Weegar. So he does have an arbitration hearing coming up in November, so it is quite possible we could still see a trade before we reach that point or shortly thereafter. Teams might be kind of waiting to see where the contract lands first before they make that trade. But obviously those kinds of teams that I mentioned are certainly rumored to have interest. We'll see if anything comes from it. But at this point, it looks as though Florida definitely wants to move him. The Leafs came really close. But because of the other moves they've made and the amount of defensemen they have, I just no longer see that really as being an option for them at this point. Now, another defenseman to possibly keep your eye on as being a trade bait here would be young defenseman Vince Dunn of the St. Louis Blues. Now, of course, we already know they lost their captain in Alex Pietrangelo, but they also have a lot of other blue liners locked up with a decent amount of money tying up their salary cap here. Looking at Justin Falk, Marco Scandella, they have Colton Parayko, Gunnarsson, and others. They have a lot of pretty solid blue liners back there. Vince Dunn, though, being one of the younger members of that core, could be a big part of their team's future if they can get the RFA defenseman signed and under contract here. But there is some reports that they're having a tough time, obviously, on negotiations, and it is a possible scenario that he could end up becoming a cap casualty and moved on as well. Of course, because of their Stanley Cup success and all the other contracts that they have on the books, it's not going to be easy for them to retain Vince Dunn here. I mean, they don't have a ton of space. At the same time, though, I don't think he's going to be able to command too huge of a contract. I would think most likely whether he stay with the Blues or go elsewhere, he's likely not going to get a long-term deal. He's probably going to get something in a shorter-term range. I would suggest anywhere from 1 to 3 years is the most likely terms that you're going to see, so that he's not quite an unrestricted free agent, but at the same time, they don't have to pay for a lot of those UFA years as well, because there's just not the appetite in the market right now from ownership around the NHL to really ink these long-term deals that, outside of a couple of exceptions this year, like an Alex Pietrangelo, players are just not getting it done. So you can think of a number of teams, like a lot of the ones I just mentioned and more, who would be interested in a player of Dunn's caliber. You look like to the Bruins, for example, who lost Torrey Krug. Vince Dunn could be a younger, cheaper option to play a similar type of role. I'm not sure he'll develop into being as quite offensively important as Krug did in the Bruins organization, but he's still somebody who has that potential. You look to a team like New Jersey, Detroit's going through a rebuild, even Ottawa to an extent. I mean, Ottawa does have a lot of defensemen, but he would be an upgrade over some of the guys they have there. So all these younger teams that are rebuilding, he'd be a great piece to pick up. Like I said, he's still relatively young, he's still developing, he could get a bigger role, and if the Blues are having a hard time signing him, there certainly is not going to be a shortage of interest for sure. And based on what insiders are saying, there is a good possibility he could become a casualty. So let me know your thoughts on a Vince Dunn trade. If the Blues can't get him signed, what are the most likely teams you feel he'd be a good fit for, and what kind of return package could the Blues be asking for his services? Now, as I mentioned before, there's another trade that's still being somewhat discussed and kind of a bit on the back burner right now, but could happen, and that's between the Edmonton and the Boston Bruins. Now, of course, we know they discuss a variety of options, mostly involving wingers being swapped. One of them being Bjork from the Bruins going to the Edmonton Oilers for Alex Chiasson. We know the Oilers have had interest in Jake DeBrusk as well. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, that the Edmonton Oilers are certainly very interested in moving Chiasson. Of course, we saw a couple of years back he had a bit of a career high and really exploded under the goal totals, but something that most of us felt likely wouldn't be able to be duplicated. And it sounds like now that the Oilers, after last year especially, are very interested in moving on from Alex Chiasson if they can find the right fit. Of course, Bjork would be a pretty good return. And in the case of that deal, it sounds like the Oilers are willing to do it. It's kind of up to Boston at this point. It sounds like they've been kind of mulling it over. And at this point, if they haven't accepted and made the deal happen, then I would think that they're obviously not completely in love with the idea. And instead, we know that there's been talk around DeBrusk as well. And with the Oilers situation, you would think that they, could still maybe move a blue line. They did bring in Tyson Barrie, who could certainly replace Oscar Klefbom. There was talk before about maybe an Adam Larson possibly being traded. They have a lot of good young D that they need to find room for. Like we're talking Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, Darnell Nurse being the main guys of the future. You've got Bouchard and Broberg. You could afford to move a veteran guy. They did sign Chris Russell to an extension, mainly so he could be exposed. So it's difficult to say from an expansion draft perspective what they'd want to do. But you could think that there is a possibility we could see a bigger deal kind of come together here over time between these two franchises. No guarantees, of course, but they have had talks before. They could resume again, and we could see, maybe a multiplayer deal going either way. Maybe a guy like Chiasson and a defenseman like a Larson for, a DeBrusk or, a Bjork, or a combination of assets going either way. So it is possible. Hard to say for sure. It's kind of up to the Bruins at this point. Sounds like the Oilers have made some offers, and they're just waiting to see if the Bruins have some serious interest or not. Because the Bruins have been relatively quiet this offseason. At some point, Don Sweeney's going to have to make a move. Just a matter of what's it going to be. Let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.